The wealthy ranchers laughed and pulled out their phones to record as the broke veteran spent his last $75 on a skeletal, trembling colt they swore would be dead before Christmas. Not one of them could have predicted that this worthless animal would destroy their reputations, their fortunes, and every arrogant word they had ever spoken. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The auction yard in Clearwater County, Montana, had seen its share of spectacles over the years, but nothing quite compared to what unfolded on that crisp autumn morning when a man nobody recognized walked through the gates and changed everything. The wealthy ranchers thought they knew about horses, about courage, and about the human spirit. What happened that day would become a legend whispered across the plains, a story that would silence the loudest critics and humble the proudest men who had ever set foot on that dusty ground. Samuel Thornton arrived at the livestock auction just as the morning sun began to cast long shadows across the wooden fences and weathered barn structures. He was 63 years old, though the lines on his face and the gray in his hair made him appear older, each wrinkle a testament to the battles he had fought and the hardships he had endured. He wore a faded olive-green military jacket, the kind that had seen action in places most people only read about in history books, and his jeans were worn thin at the knees from years of honest work. His boots, scuffed and dusty, had carried him through 2 tours in Vietnam and countless miles of American soil since his return home decades ago. Samuel had served his country with honor, earning medals he never spoke about and carrying wounds both visible and invisible that he bore in silence. When he came home from the war, he found a nation divided and a welcome that was anything but warm. The years that followed were difficult, filled with odd jobs, sleepless nights, and the constant struggle to find his place in a world that seemed to have moved on without him. He had worked on ranches, in factories, and on construction sites, never complaining, always giving his best, but fortune had never smiled upon him the way it smiled upon others. Now, in what many would consider the twilight of his life, Samuel had scraped together every last dollar he had saved over the past 5 years. It was not much by any standard, certainly not enough to impress anyone at an auction frequented by the wealthiest cattle barons and horse breeders in the region. But Samuel had a dream, one he had carried in his heart since he was a young boy growing up on his grandfather's small farm, before the war took him away and changed everything. He wanted a horse of his own, a companion to share his remaining years with on the small patch of land he rented at the edge of town. The auction yard was already buzzing with activity when Samuel found a spot near the fence to watch the proceedings. Men in pristine white shirts and expensive cowboy hats gathered in clusters, their silver belt buckles glinting in the sunlight as they discussed bloodlines and breeding prospects with the casual confidence of those who had never known want. These were the Harrington brothers, Preston and Wade, along with their circle of wealthy associates who owned thousands of acres of prime Montana rangeland. Their ranch, the Double H, was legendary in these parts, home to some of the finest quarter horses money could buy, and they never missed an auction, always looking to add to their already impressive collection. Preston Harrington, the elder of the 2 brothers at 55, noticed Samuel standing alone by the fence and nudged his brother with a smirk. The old veteran in his worn jacket stood out like a thorn among roses, and Preston had never been one to let an opportunity for amusement pass him by. He whispered something to Wade, and soon the entire group was casting glances in Samuel's direction, their laughter barely concealed behind cupped hands and turned shoulders. Samuel noticed their attention but said nothing. He had faced far worse than the mockery of rich men in his lifetime. He had faced enemy fire, hunger, and the kind of loneliness that could break a man's spirit if he let it. A few sideways glances from people who had never known real struggle meant nothing to him. He kept his eyes fixed on the parade of horses being led through the auction ring, waiting patiently for something that spoke to his soul. The morning wore on, and magnificent animals came and went, each fetching prices that made Samuel's meager savings seem almost laughable. Thoroughbreds with gleaming coats and powerful builds were sold to the highest bidders, most of them going to the Harrington brothers or their wealthy friends, who seemed to treat the whole affair as little more than entertainment, a game where money was no object and winning was everything. It was nearly noon when the auctioneer's tone changed, becoming almost apologetic as he announced the next lot. A murmur rippled through the crowd as handlers struggled to lead a young colt into the ring. The animal was wild-eyed and skittish, fighting against the rope with a desperation that spoke of fear rather than defiance. His coat was dull and patchy, his ribs visible beneath skin that seemed stretched too thin over his frame. Sores marked his legs, and his mane was tangled with burrs and debris. He was, by any conventional measure, a disaster. "This here is a Mustang Colt," the auctioneer announced, his voice lacking its usual enthusiasm. "Captured from federal land about 3 months ago. He has had some health issues, as you can see, and he is not yet halter broken. We are starting the bidding at $200. Silence fell over the crowd. The wealthy ranchers exchanged looks of disgust and disbelief. Preston Harrington laughed outright, his voice carrying across the yard. $200 for that bag of bones. You would have to pay me to take that diseased creature off your hands. He will be dead before winter, mark my words." The other ranchers joined in the laughter, pointing at the struggling colt and shaking their heads. Nobody raised a paddle. The auctioneer, looking uncomfortable, began to lower the price, his voice growing more desperate with each reduction. $150, $175 for this young Mustang, anyone? Samuel Thornton stepped forward, his hand rising slowly into the air. Every eye in the auction yard turned to look at him, and the laughter that had filled the space moments before transformed into something crueler, something that cut deeper than any blade. The auctioneer paused mid-sentence, clearly surprised that anyone would bid on such a pathetic specimen. He squinted toward Samuel, perhaps wondering if the old man had misunderstood the proceedings or raised his hand by accident. $75 from the gentleman in the green jacket, he announced, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Do I hear 80? Preston Harrington could not contain himself. He stepped forward, his expensive boots kicking up small clouds of dust as he approached the fence where Samuel stood. "Well now, what do we have here? A war hero come to save the day." He gestured toward the trembling colt in the ring. "Friend, I do not know what you think you are looking at, but that animal is not worth the rope around his neck. He is wild, he is sick, and he will never amount to anything. You would be throwing your money into a hole in the ground." Samuel met Preston's gaze without flinching. His eyes, the color of weathered steel, held a depth that the rancher could not begin to fathom. "I see something worth saving," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the hostile attention. "I have seen worse cases come back from the brink." Wade Harrington joined his brother, flanked by 2 other ranchers who seemed eager to witness the confrontation. "Come back from the brink?" Wade laughed, slapping his thigh for emphasis. "Mister, that colt has got what looks like rain rot, probably parasites, and Lord knows what else brewing inside him. The Bureau of Land Management rounded up a whole herd of these wild ones, and this was the worst of the lot. Even the kill buyers passed on him." "You understand what that means?" Samuel understood perfectly. He had seen the kill buyers at previous auctions, men who purchased unwanted horses for pennies on the pound and shipped them across borders to slaughter facilities. The fact that even they had deemed this colt worthless spoke volumes about his condition. But Samuel also understood something else, something that men like the Harrington brothers would never comprehend. He understood that worth was not always measured in dollars or bloodlines or show ribbons. Sometimes worth was measured in heart, in the will to survive against impossible odds. $75 going once, the auctioneer called out, clearly wanting to move on from this uncomfortable spectacle. going twice. Sold to the gentleman by the fence. A ripple of laughter and muttered comments spread through the crowd as Samuel made his way to the payment window. He counted out the bills carefully, each one representing hours of labor, meals skipped, and small comforts denied. The clerk looked at him with something between pity and curiosity, sliding the receipt across the counter along with a basic halter and lead rope that came with the purchase. "You know," the clerk said in a low voice, "there is a rendering facility about 40 miles east. They will take him off your hands, no questions asked. Might even give you a few dollars for the trouble." Samuel tucked the receipt into his jacket pocket without responding. He had not survived everything life had thrown at him only to give up on another living creature at the first sign of difficulty. He made his way to the holding pen where the Colt had been moved, still fighting against his handlers with every ounce of strength his weakened body could muster. The Harrington brothers and their entourage had followed at a distance, apparently unwilling to miss the entertainment. They leaned against the fence, passing a silver flask between them as they watched Samuel approach the terrified animal. Preston pulled out his phone and began recording, nudging his companions with barely suppressed glee. "This ought to be good," he announced loudly enough for Samuel to hear. "The old fool is going to get himself killed trying to load that wild thing. Then maybe we can buy back his worthless hide for dog food." Samuel ignored them. He had learned long ago that the opinions of small men meant nothing in the grand scheme of things. He approached the pen slowly, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The Colt pressed himself against the far corner, his sides heaving, his eyes rolling with fear. White foam flecked his lips, and his legs trembled so violently that it seemed he might collapse at any moment. "Easy now," Samuel said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Easy, son. Nobody is going to hurt you anymore." He made no move to enter the pen, instead simply standing at the gate, allowing the Colt to become accustomed to his presence. Minutes passed, then more minutes still. The wealthy ranchers grew bored and began to drift away, their attention spans too short for anything that did not involve immediate gratification. But Samuel remained, patient as stone, speaking in that same gentle tone about nothing in particular. He talked about the weather, about the small cabin he called home, about the patch of pasture that was not much but would be enough for one horse to graze. He talked about loneliness and second chances and the way the mountains looked at sunrise when the world was still and quiet. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the Colt's trembling began to ease. His ears, which had been pinned flat against his head, gradually relaxed and turned toward the sound of Samuel's voice. There was something in that voice, something that spoke of understanding and shared pain, that reached through the animal's terror and touched something deeper. When Samuel finally entered the pen an hour later, the Colt did not bolt. He stood rigid, every muscle tensed for flight, but he allowed the old veteran to approach. Samuel moved like water, smooth and unthreatening, until he stood close enough to reach out and touch the Colt's trembling shoulder. The animal flinched but did not pull away. "That is it," Samuel murmured, running his calloused hand along the Colt's neck. "That is it, son. We are going to be all right, you and me. We are going to show them all." Loading the Colt into his battered old horse trailer was another trial entirely, but Samuel had nothing if not time and patience. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across the now empty auction yard, the unlikely pair was finally on their way home. Samuel drove slowly, mindful of his precious cargo, while behind him the Colt stood braced against the trailer walls, still uncertain but no longer fighting. The Harrington brothers had long since departed in their gleaming pickup trucks, already forgetting about the foolish old veteran and his diseased purchase. They had no way of knowing that what they had witnessed that day was only the beginning of a story that would eventually bring them to their knees. Samuel's property sat at the end of a dirt road that wound through a stand of ponderosa pines before opening onto 5 acres of meadow bordered by a small creek. It was not much compared to the sprawling empires of the Harrington brothers and their kind, but to Samuel it represented everything he had worked for since coming home from the war. A modest cabin with a wood-burning stove, a small barn that he had repaired himself over the course of 2 summers, and a pasture where the grass grew thick and green, thanks to the mountain runoff that fed the creek. It was humble, but it was home. When Samuel backed the trailer up to the pasture gate and opened the door, the Colt exploded out with what little strength he had left, stumbling and nearly falling before catching himself and bolting to the far corner of the fenced enclosure. He stood there trembling, sides heaving, watching Samuel with eyes that held equal parts fear and exhaustion. The journey had taken its toll on an animal already pushed to the limits of his endurance. Samuel did not try to approach him that first night. Instead, he filled a water trough with fresh water from the well and scattered some hay near the fence where the Colt could reach it without having to venture too close to the barn or the cabin. Then he sat on his porch in the gathering darkness, watching the silhouette of the horse against the starlit sky, and made a silent promise to both of them that he would not give up, no matter how long the road ahead might be. The first week was the hardest. Samuel woke before dawn each morning to check on the Colt, whom he had decided to name Spirit, for the wildfire he could see burning in those frightened eyes, despite all the abuse and neglect the animal had suffered. Spirit wanted nothing to do with him at first, retreating whenever Samuel came near, refusing to eat unless the old veteran moved completely out of sight. The sores on his legs wept with infection, and his coat remained dull and lifeless, shedding in patches that revealed raw, irritated skin beneath. Samuel knew he needed help, so he called the only veterinarian in the county who would work with someone on a payment plan. Dr. Margaret Chen arrived 3 days later, her practical sedan looking out of place on the rutted dirt road. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and capable hands, and she had been treating animals in Clearwater County for nearly 30 years. When she saw Spirit standing in the corner of the pasture, her expression grew grave. "This is bad, Samuel," she said honestly, leaning against the fence and shaking her head. "He is severely malnourished, dehydrated, and those sores are infected. Could be rain rot like you suspected, but I'm also seeing signs of possible strangles exposure. His immune system is compromised from stress and poor nutrition. Honestly, most people would have this animal put down." Samuel nodded slowly. "But he is not most horses, and I am not most people. What do we need to do?" Dr. Chen studied him for a long moment, perhaps seeing something in his weathered face that reminded her why she had become a veterinarian in the first place. "We need to get him treated for the infections, start him on a deworming protocol, and get proper nutrition into him slowly. Too much too fast and his system could go into shock." She paused, calculating. "It is going to be expensive, Samuel. The medications alone will run several $100s, and that is before we factor in follow-up visits and specialized feed." Samuel thought about the small amount of money he had left in his savings account, the Social Security check that barely covered his own modest needs, and the odd jobs he picked up around town when his body allowed. "I will find a way," he said simply. "Just tell me what he needs." Over the following weeks, Samuel devoted himself entirely to Spirit's recovery. He took on extra work wherever he could find it, repairing fences for neighboring ranches, splitting firewood, and doing handyman jobs in town, despite the protests of his aging joints and the old shrapnel wound in his hip that never quite stopped aching. Every dollar he earned went toward medication, feed, and veterinary care for the Colt, who was slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to trust him. The breakthrough came on a cool morning in late October, nearly 6 weeks after the auction. Samuel was sitting on an overturned bucket in the pasture, simply being present as he had learned to do, when Spirit approached him for the first time voluntarily. The Colt stopped about 10 feet away, nostrils flaring, ready to bolt at the slightest provocation. But he did not bolt. He stood there, ears pricked forward, studying the man who had shown him nothing but patience and kindness. Samuel remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. Minutes passed in silence, marked only by the whisper of wind through the pine trees and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Then, with a hesitation that spoke of immense courage, Spirit took another step forward, and another, until finally he stretched out his neck and touched his muzzle to Samuel's outstretched hand. The old veteran felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, but he did not move to wipe them away. He sat there in the morning light, feeling the warm breath of this broken creature against his palm, and understood that something profound had just occurred. Trust, once shattered, was the hardest thing in the world to rebuild. He knew that better than most. And yet here was this wild colt, this discarded and dismissed animal that everyone had written off as worthless, choosing to believe that not all humans meant him harm. "That is it, Spirit," Samuel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "That is it, son. We are going to make it through this together." From that moment on, their bond deepened with each passing day. Spirit began to follow Samuel around the pasture, nickering softly when he saw the old man approaching with his morning bucket of feed. The sores on his legs slowly healed under Dr. Chen's careful treatment, and his coat began to show the first hints of a rich chestnut color beneath the dullness and the patches. He was still thin, still skittish around sudden movements or loud noises, but there was a light in his eyes now that had not been there before. It was the light of hope, of possibility, of a future that might hold something other than pain and fear. And Samuel, watching his unlikely companion grow stronger each day, felt something similar kindling in his own weathered heart. Winter came early to Clearwater County that year, bringing with it bitter winds that howled down from the mountains and blanketed the valley in snow that reached past a man's knees. For many ranchers, the harsh season meant losses, sick cattle, and the constant struggle to keep animals fed and warm. For Samuel and Spirit, it meant something else entirely. It meant proving that the bond they had forged could withstand the darkest and coldest of days. Samuel had prepared as best he could, stacking firewood until it towered against the side of his cabin and stockpiling hay in the small barn where Spirit now willingly sheltered when the temperatures dropped. The colt had transformed remarkably in the months since the auction. His coat had grown thick and lustrous, a deep chestnut that gleamed like burnished copper in the winter sunlight. His ribs no longer showed beneath his skin, and muscle had begun to fill out his frame, hinting at the powerful horse he was destined to become. But it was his spirit, that indefinable quality that had earned him his name, that had changed the most dramatically of all. Gone was the wild-eyed terror that had defined his first weeks on the property. In its place was a calm confidence, a trust in Samuel that seemed to deepen with each passing day. Spirit would follow the old veteran around like a faithful dog, nosing at his pockets for the carrot pieces Samuel always kept there, resting his head on Samuel's shoulder while the man brushed the tangles from his mane. Their connection had become something the neighbors whispered about when they passed by on the road, something that seemed almost magical in its intensity. Dr. Chen visited every few weeks to monitor Spirit's progress, and each time she shook her head in amazement at the transformation. "I have been doing this for 30 years, Samuel," she told him during one such visit as Spirit stood calmly for his examination, something that would have been unthinkable just months before. "I have seen a lot of horses come back from bad situations, but nothing quite like this. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Samuel smiled, running his hand along Spirit's neck. "We just understand each other," he said simply. "We have both been through things that leave marks. Sometimes the best medicine is knowing someone believes in you." Word of the old veteran and his rescued Mustang began to spread beyond the immediate neighborhood. People in town would stop Samuel when he came in for supplies, asking about the horse they had heard so much about. Some were genuinely curious, touched by the story of second chances and redemption. Others were skeptical, dismissing the tales as exaggeration or outright fabrication. Among the skeptics were the Harrington brothers, who had not forgotten the foolish old man who had dared to defy their predictions at the autumn auction. Preston Harrington first heard about Spirit's recovery at the feed store one morning in January. He was purchasing grain for his prize quarter horses when the store owner, a friendly man named Bill Hutchins, mentioned that Samuel Thornton had been in earlier that week buying supplements for his Mustang. "That scrawny thing is still alive?" Preston laughed, his voice carrying through the small store. "I gave that bag of bones until Christmas, and here we are in the new year. Maybe the old fool got lucky." Bill Hutchins, who had known Samuel for years and respected him quietly, shrugged non-committally. "Word is the horse is doing real well. Some folks who have seen him say he is turning into something special. Spirit, Samuel calls him. Fitting name from what I hear." Preston's expression soured at this news. He did not like being wrong, and he liked it even less when his predictions were proven incorrect by someone he considered beneath him. "A Mustang is a Mustang," he said dismissively, slapping his credit card on the counter. "You can put all the work into them you want, but they will never be worth anything. Wild blood cannot be tamed, not really. That horse will turn on the old man sooner or later. Just wait and see." But spring came, and Spirit did not turn. Instead, he flourished. As the snow melted and the meadow erupted in wildflowers, Samuel began the careful process of training his young companion, using methods he had learned from his grandfather decades ago, methods based on patience and trust rather than force and domination. Spirit responded as if he had been waiting his whole life for someone to speak to him in a language he could understand. By April, Spirit was accepting a saddle without protest. By May, Samuel was riding him through the meadow, marveling at the smooth gait and the responsive intelligence of this horse that everyone had dismissed as worthless. Spirit moved like water flowing over stones, anticipating Samuel's slightest cue, turning and stopping and accelerating with a grace that belied his rough beginnings. There was something in the way he carried himself now, a pride and confidence that seemed to come from knowing he was valued, that he mattered, that he had a purpose. The summer months brought new challenges and new triumphs. Samuel began taking Spirit on longer rides through the national forest that bordered his property, exploring trails that wound through ancient stands of timber and opened onto vistas that stole the breath away. These rides became a sanctuary for both of them, a time when the troubles of the world fell away and there was nothing but the rhythm of hooves on earth and the whisper of wind through pine needles. It was during one such ride that Samuel first noticed Spirit's unusual talent. They had come upon a fallen tree blocking the trail, and before Samuel could even think about dismounting to find a way around, Spirit had gathered himself and sailed over the obstacle with an effortless jump that left Samuel momentarily speechless. The old veteran had ridden many horses in his life, but he had never felt anything quite like that moment of flight, that perfect harmony of power and grace. He patted Spirit's neck as they continued down the trail, a new idea beginning to form in the back of his mind. "Well now," he murmured softly, "maybe there is more to you than even I realized." What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that would bring Samuel and Spirit face to face with the very men who had mocked them. And the confrontation that followed would leave the entire county speechless. The Clearwater County Fair was the highlight of the summer social calendar, a week-long celebration that drew people from across the region to compete in everything from pie baking to livestock judging. But the event that drew the largest crowds, the one that filled the grandstands to capacity and had people placing bets in hushed whispers, was the annual open jumping competition. For years, the event had been dominated by the Harrington brothers and their stable of professionally trained quarter horses, each animal worth more than most people's annual salaries. Samuel had never considered entering any competition with Spirit. The thought had not even crossed his mind until that day on the trail, when the young Mustang had cleared the fallen tree with such effortless grace. In the weeks that followed, Samuel found himself setting up makeshift jumps in the meadow just to see what Spirit could do. What he discovered left him breathless every single time. Spirit did not just jump obstacles, he flew over them, his body arcing through the air with a natural athleticism that could not be taught, only born. Dr. Chen noticed the jumps during one of her visits and raised an eyebrow at Samuel. "Are you thinking what I think you are thinking?" she asked, watching Spirit clear a stack of hay bales with room to spare. Samuel shrugged, but there was a glint in his eye that she had not seen before. "I am thinking that horse deserves a chance to show what he is made of. And maybe, just maybe, some folks around here need to learn that worth is not determined by bloodlines or price tags." The veterinarian smiled slowly. "The fair competition is in 3 weeks. Registration closes Friday." She paused, studying the old veteran's face. "You know the Harringtons will be there. They win every year. Their horse Sovereign has taken first place 4 years running." Samuel watched Spirit trotting back toward him, ears pricked forward, coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Then it is time someone gave them some real competition," he said quietly. News of Samuel's entry spread through town like wildfire. At the feed store, at the diner, at the post office, people talked of little else. The crazy old veteran was going to enter his rescued Mustang against the Harringtons' prize jumpers. Most people thought he had lost his mind. A few, those who had seen Spirit in action or who simply believed in the power of underdogs, quietly rooted for him. But everyone agreed on one thing: the competition was going to be something to see. Preston Harrington heard about the entry while having lunch at the Cattlemen's Club with his brother and several other wealthy ranchers. His reaction was immediate and predictable. He laughed so hard that he nearly choked on his steak. "The old fool is actually going to humiliate himself in public," he managed between gasps. "This is better than anything I could have hoped for. That broken-down Mustang against Sovereign? It will not even be a contest." Wade Harrington was more cautious. "I have heard some things, Preston. People are saying that horse can really move. Maybe we should not underestimate them." Preston waved off his brother's concerns. "A Mustang is a Mustang. Wild blood, remember? They have no discipline, no training, no breeding. Sovereign cost me $200,000 and has been trained by the best coaches in the country. Some old man with a $75 rescue horse is not going to embarrass us." He leaned back in his chair, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "But I tell you what, let us make it interesting. When that pathetic animal fails, and he will fail, I want everyone to see it. I want the whole county to watch that old veteran's dreams crumble in front of their eyes." The morning of the competition dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect summer day that seemed designed for exactly this purpose. Samuel woke before sunrise, as he always did, and spent extra time grooming Spirit until his coat shone like polished mahogany. He braided the mane carefully, the way his grandfather had taught him all those years ago, and cleaned each hoof until they gleamed. Spirit stood patiently through all of it, occasionally turning his head to nuzzle Samuel's shoulder as if to offer reassurance. "Easy now," Samuel murmured, more to himself than to the horse. "We have been through harder things than this, have we not? Whatever happens out there today, I am proud of you. I want you to know that." The fairgrounds were already crowded when Samuel arrived with Spirit in his weathered trailer. He could feel the eyes on them as he unloaded the horse, could hear the whispers and the barely suppressed laughter from certain quarters. The Harrington brothers had set up their operation at the far end of the competitors' area, a massive trailer and tent arrangement that looked more like a mobile palace than anything else. Sovereign, their champion, was being attended to by a team of 3 handlers, his coat already gleaming, his tack probably worth more than Samuel's entire property. Preston spotted Samuel across the grounds and made his way over, trailed by his brother and several of their wealthy friends. The group stopped a few feet away, making no effort to hide their amusement. "Well, well," Preston drawled, looking Spirit up and down with exaggerated scrutiny. You actually showed up. I have to admire your courage, old man, even if I cannot admire your judgment." He reached out as if to touch Spirit's neck, but the horse shied away, ears flattening. "Still wild, I see. You know there is still time to withdraw. Save yourself the embarrassment." Samuel met Preston's gaze without flinching. The same calm that had sustained him through combat, through loss, through decades of struggle, settled over him now like a familiar cloak. "We did not come here to withdraw," he said simply. "We came here to compete." Preston's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered his composure. "Suit yourself. But do not say I did not warn you." He turned and walked away, his entourage following, their laughter floating back across the fairgrounds like a bitter wind. Samuel turned to Spirit and rested his forehead against the horse's neck. "This is it," he whispered. Time to show them what we are made of." The grandstands filled quickly as the afternoon wore on, spectators jostling for the best views of the jumping arena that had been set up in the center of the fairgrounds. The course was challenging. 12 obstacles of varying heights and configurations designed to test both horse and rider to their limits. Bright flags marked the path, and judges sat in elevated booths with clipboards and stopwatches, ready to score each performance on time, technique, and faults. A single knocked rail meant 4 penalty points. A refusal to jump meant elimination. Only the most skilled combinations could hope to complete the course cleanly. Samuel walked Spirit around the warm-up area, keeping to themselves while the other competitors put their horses through elaborate preparation routines. There were 8 entries in total, including Sovereign and 2 other horses from the Harrington stable. The rest were owned by wealthy ranchers from neighboring counties, each animal polished and primed, each rider dressed in immaculate competition attire. Samuel, in his worn jeans and simple button-down shirt, looked painfully out of place among them, but he did not care about appearances. He cared only about the horse beneath him and the chance they had been given. The competition began promptly at 2 o'clock. The first few riders put in respectable performances, navigating the course with varying degrees of success. One horse refused at the water jump and was eliminated. Another knocked down 2 rails, earning 8 penalty points that effectively ended any chance at a top finish. The crowd cheered politely for each effort, saving their true enthusiasm for the main event they had all come to see. When Sovereign entered the arena, a hush fell over the grandstands. The horse was magnificent, there was no denying it. His black coat gleamed like oil, and his movements were precise and powerful as Preston Harrington guided him toward the starting position. This was a horse bred for competition, trained by experts, groomed for greatness from the moment of his birth. Everything about him screamed excellence and expense. Preston raised his hand to acknowledge the crowd, soaking in the attention with obvious pleasure. Then the starting bell rang, and Sovereign exploded into motion. The horse attacked the course with mechanical precision, clearing each obstacle with calculated efficiency. His jumps were textbook perfect, neither too high nor too low, conserving energy while still maintaining the speed needed for a winning time. The crowd counted along with each successful clearance, their excitement building as it became clear that Preston was going to deliver another flawless performance. When Sovereign landed after the final jump, the stopwatch showed a time of 47.3 seconds with 0 faults. It was an exceptional run, perhaps the best Preston had ever produced. He trotted Sovereign around the arena in a victory lap before the results were even official, waving to the crowd and shooting a pointed look toward where Samuel waited with Spirit in the holding area. "Try to beat that, old man," Preston called out as he passed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. His supporters laughed and cheered, already celebrating what they assumed was an inevitable victory. The next few competitors could not match Sovereign's performance. One came close with a clean round, but a slower time. Another knocked a rail on the combination jump. By the time Samuel's name was called over the loudspeaker, Sovereign's score seemed insurmountable. The crowd murmured as the old veteran guided Spirit into the arena, many already feeling sorry for what they were about to witness. Samuel felt Spirit tense beneath him as they entered the ring, the horse's ears swiveling to take in the unfamiliar surroundings, the noise, the hundreds of eyes fixed upon them. "Easy now," Samuel whispered, leaning forward to stroke Spirit's neck. "Remember what we practiced. Remember who you are." For a moment, Spirit stood perfectly still at the starting position, his body coiled like a spring. Samuel could feel the power waiting to be unleashed, the wild heart that beat beneath that gleaming chestnut coat. This was not a horse bred in some sterile facility, trained by professionals who saw him only as an investment. This was a creature born free on the open range, shaped by wind and weather, and the relentless demands of survival. And that wildness, that untamable spirit that the Harringtons had dismissed as worthless, was about to become his greatest advantage. The starting bell rang. Spirit launched forward with an acceleration that drew gasps from the crowd. His stride was longer than Sovereign's, his approach to the first obstacle unconventional but devastatingly effective. Where the other horses had measured their jumps carefully, Spirit simply soared, clearing the rail by a margin that seemed almost reckless. Samuel moved with him instinctively, their bodies synchronized in a way that spoke of the countless hours they had spent together, the trust they had built from the ground up. The second jump came and went in a blur of motion, then the third. The crowd had fallen silent now, watching in disbelief as the scrawny Mustang they had written off transformed before their eyes into something extraordinary. Spirit did not jump the obstacles so much as fly over them, his body arcing through the air with a natural grace that no amount of training could replicate. This was raw talent, pure and unfiltered, the kind of gift that appears once in a generation. The water jump, which had eliminated one competitor and caused others to slow dramatically, barely registered as Spirit gathered himself and launched across it with feet to spare. The combination jump, 3 obstacles in rapid succession that required precise timing and explosive power, became a showcase of his incredible athleticism. The crowd began to stir, then to murmur, then to roar as they realized what they were witnessing. Samuel heard none of it. His world had narrowed to the horse beneath him and the course ahead. Every muscle in his body moved in harmony with Spirit's, anticipating each leap, adjusting for each landing. They were no longer man and horse. They were something more, something unified, something that transcended the boundaries between species and spoke to a deeper truth about connection and trust. The final jump rose before them, and Spirit gathered himself one last time. Samuel leaned forward, whispered a single word of encouragement, and then they were airborne, sailing over the obstacle with the same effortless grace that had defined the entire run. When Spirit's hooves touched down on the other side, the stopwatch clicked to a stop. The time flashed on the scoreboard, 44.1 seconds, 0 faults. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat, but it seemed to stretch into eternity. Then the grandstands erupted. People who had come expecting to witness a humiliation found themselves on their feet, cheering for an outcome nobody had predicted. Strangers embraced, children pointed excitedly at the scoreboard, and somewhere in the crowd, Dr. Margaret Chen wiped tears from her eyes with the back of her hand. The old veteran and his rescued Mustang had done the impossible. They had beaten Sovereign by more than 3 seconds, a margin so decisive that there could be no argument, no dispute, no way to explain it away. Samuel sat atop Spirit in the center of the arena, momentarily overwhelmed by the reaction. He had hoped to finish respectably, to prove that Spirit deserved a chance, but this exceeded anything he had dared to imagine. Spirit pranced beneath him, energized by the crowd's response, his head held high with an almost regal bearing. In that moment, he looked nothing like the trembling, broken creature Samuel had led away from the auction a year ago. He looked like what he truly was, a champion, In the competitors' area, Preston Harrington stood frozen, his face drained of color. The silver trophy that had seemed so certain to be his for a fifth consecutive year now belonged to someone else, to the very man he had mocked and dismissed without a second thought. His brother Wade placed a hand on his shoulder, but Preston shrugged it off violently, his expression contorting with rage and disbelief. "This is impossible," he sputtered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "That animal was half dead when he bought it. This has to be some kind of trick." But there was no trick. The judges confirmed the score. The time was accurate. Spirit had won fair and square, and every person in attendance had witnessed it with their own eyes. As Samuel guided his horse out of the arena, people reached out to touch them, to congratulate them, to be part of something that already felt like legend in the making. The old veteran accepted their praise with quiet grace, but his attention remained focused on Spirit, stroking the horse's neck and murmuring words of praise that only the two of them could hear. The trophy presentation took place an hour later on a small stage erected near the arena. Samuel climbed the steps slowly, his bad hip protesting after the exertion of the competition, but his smile never wavered. The county commissioner, a portly woman named Helen Bradley, who had known Samuel for decades, handed him the golden trophy with visible emotion. "On behalf of Clearwater County," she announced into the microphone, "I am honored to present this year's Open Jumping Championship to Samuel Thornton and his horse Spirit." She paused, looking out at the crowd. "I think I speak for everyone when I say that what we witnessed today was not just a competition. It was a reminder that greatness can come from the most unexpected places, and that the measure of a champion is not found in price tags or pedigrees, but in heart." The crowd cheered again, and Samuel held the trophy aloft, the late afternoon sun catching the gold and sending sparkles of light across the fairgrounds. But even in this moment of triumph, he felt the weight of hostile eyes upon him. Preston Harrington stood at the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed, his jaw set in a hard line. Their eyes met across the distance, and Samuel saw something in the rancher's expression that gave him pause. It was not just anger or humiliation. It was the look of a man who did not intend to let this defeat stand. The days following the competition brought a whirlwind of attention that Samuel had never anticipated. Local newspapers ran stories about the veteran and his rescue horse, complete with before and after photographs that showed Spirit's remarkable transformation. A television station from the state capital sent a crew to interview Samuel at his small cabin, and the segment aired on the evening news to widespread acclaim. People who had never heard of Clearwater County suddenly knew the story of Spirit, and letters of support began arriving in Samuel's mailbox from across the country. Through it all, Samuel tried to maintain his quiet routine. He woke before dawn, tended to Spirit, and went about his daily chores as he always had. The trophy sat on his mantle, a gleaming reminder of what they had accomplished, but he was careful not to let the attention change him or his relationship with the horse who had made it all possible. Spirit seemed unaffected by the fame, still greeting Samuel each morning with the same soft nicker, still following him around the pasture like an oversized puppy. But trouble was brewing just over the horizon. Preston Harrington, humiliated in front of the entire county, had not accepted his defeat gracefully. In the weeks following the competition, he began making inquiries about Spirit's origins, digging into the records of the Bureau of Land Management roundup that had brought the wild Mustang to the auction in the first place. He hired a lawyer from the city, a man known for finding loopholes and exploiting technicalities, and set him to work with a single instruction: find something, anything. The first indication Samuel had that something was wrong came on a Thursday morning in early September. He was fixing a section of fence when a black sedan pulled up his dirt driveway, followed by a county sheriff's vehicle. Two men in suits emerged from the sedan, their expressions carefully neutral, while Deputy Tom Vasquez stepped out of the patrol car with obvious reluctance. Tom was a good man who had known Samuel for years, and the look on his face suggested he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Samuel set down his tools and walked to meet them, Spirit trailing behind him as always. The Mustang sensed the tension immediately, his ears flattening as he positioned himself slightly in front of Samuel in a protective stance. "Easy, boy," Samuel murmured, though his own heart had begun to beat faster. "Whatever this is, we will face it together." One of the suited men stepped forward, producing a folded document from his jacket pocket. "Samuel Thornton, I am Gerald Finch representing Preston Harrington and the Double H Ranch." He extended the document toward Samuel. "You have been served. We are filing for immediate seizure of the animal known as Spirit on grounds of fraudulent acquisition and improper documentation. A court hearing has been scheduled for next week." Samuel took the papers, his weathered hands steady despite the shock coursing through him. "On what grounds?" he asked quietly. The lawyer smiled, a cold expression that held no warmth. "On grounds that you knowingly purchased stolen federal property. That Mustang was never legally cleared for sale." The news of the lawsuit spread through Clearwater County faster than a summer wildfire. Within hours of the papers being served, Samuel's phone began ringing with calls from neighbors, friends, and people he had never met, all wanting to express their outrage and offer support. The general consensus was unanimous. Preston Harrington was a sore loser who could not accept being beaten by a poor veteran and a horse nobody wanted, so he was using his wealth and connections to take by legal force what he could not win fairly. Samuel spent that night sitting on his porch, the court documents spread across his lap, reading and rereading the allegations by the light of a kerosene lamp. The claims were technical and complicated, citing obscure regulations about the Bureau of Land Management's wild horse adoption program. According to the lawsuit, the Mustang roundup that had brought Spirit to the auction had been conducted improperly, and several of the horses, including Spirit, had not completed the required holding period before being transferred for sale. This, the lawyers argued, meant that ownership had never legally transferred to Samuel, and the horse remained federal property that had been illegally sold. It was nonsense, of course. Samuel had paid his money at a legitimate auction, received proper documentation, and had done everything by the book. But he also understood how the system worked. Men like Preston Harrington could afford to drag cases through the courts for years, burying opponents in legal fees and procedural delays until they simply gave up. Samuel had no such resources. His savings had been depleted caring for Spirit, and the idea of hiring a lawyer to fight back seemed as distant as the moon. Spirit stood at the pasture fence, watching Samuel with those intelligent dark eyes that seemed to understand far more than any animal should. The horse had sensed his companion's distress from the moment the lawyers arrived, and he had refused to leave Samuel's side all evening. Now he nickered softly, stretching his neck over the fence to nudge Samuel's shoulder. The gesture, so simple and so full of trust, nearly broke the old veteran's heart. "I will not let them take you," Samuel whispered, his voice cracking despite his efforts to stay strong. "I do not know how yet, but I will find a way. I promise you that." The following days brought an outpouring of community support that Samuel had never expected. Bill Hutchins from the feed store organized a collection to help with legal expenses, placing a jar on his counter with a handwritten sign that read, "Justice for Spirit." Within a week, the jar had been replaced 3 times, filled to overflowing with bills and coins from people who could barely afford to spare them. Dr. Chen offered to testify about Spirit's condition when Samuel first brought him home. Documentation that would prove the horse had been neglected and abandoned long before Samuel ever laid eyes on him. But the most surprising support came from an unexpected quarter. A young woman named Rebecca Torres showed up at Samuel's cabin one morning, introducing herself as a reporter from a national news network. She had seen the local coverage of the competition and the subsequent lawsuit, and she believed the story had national implications. "This is not just about one horse or one veteran," she explained, sitting across from Samuel at his small kitchen table. "This is about whether wealthy people can use the legal system to bully those without resources. It is about what we value as a society. If you will let me, I would like to tell your story to the whole country." Samuel hesitated. He had never sought attention, never wanted to be in the spotlight, but he also understood that public pressure might be the only weapon he had against the Harrington fortune. He thought of Spirit, of the bond they had built, of the promise he had made. "All right," he said finally. "Tell them whatever you need to tell them. Just help me keep my horse." The story aired 3 days before the court hearing, and it changed everything. Rebecca Torres had crafted a masterful narrative, weaving together Samuel's military service, his struggles after the war, his rescue of Spirit, and their unlikely triumph at the county fair. She included footage of the Harrington brothers at the auction, mocking Samuel and predicting Spirit's death. She interviewed townspeople who spoke of Samuel's character and Preston's reputation for arrogance, and she obtained documents showing that the Double H Ranch had previously been cited for animal welfare violations, painting a damning picture of the men who now claimed to be concerned about proper procedure. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with support for Samuel and Spirit, the hashtag #SaveSpirit trending nationally within hours. Donations poured in from across the country, far exceeding what was needed for legal fees. A retired federal judge from Wyoming offered to represent Samuel pro bono, outraged by what she called a blatant abuse of the legal system. Politicians began making statements, including a senator who called the lawsuit an insult to veterans everywhere and demanded an investigation into the BLM auction procedures. Preston Harrington, accustomed to operating in the shadows of legal maneuvering, suddenly found himself in a spotlight he had never anticipated. Reporters camped outside his ranch, asking uncomfortable questions about his motives and his past business practices. Former employees came forward with stories of mistreatment and intimidation. The carefully cultivated image of a respectable rancher and community leader began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. The night before the hearing, Samuel stood in the pasture with Spirit as the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. The horse pressed close to him, offering the silent comfort that had become the foundation of their relationship. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Samuel said softly, "I want you to know that saving you was the best decision I ever made. You gave me a reason to keep going when I had almost forgotten what that felt like. No court can take that away from us." Spirit lowered his head, resting it against Samuel's chest in a gesture of complete trust. The old veteran wrapped his arms around the horse's neck and held on, drawing strength from the connection that had sustained them both through so much adversity. Tomorrow, the whole world would be watching. Tomorrow, they would face Preston Harrington and his lawyers in a courtroom battle that would determine Spirit's fate. But tonight, in this quiet moment under the stars, there was only the two of them, standing together as they always had, ready to face whatever came next. The Clearwater County Courthouse had never seen a crowd like the one that gathered on that crisp September morning. People lined the steps and spilled onto the surrounding streets, holding signs that read, "Justice for Spirit" and "Veterans deserve better." News vans from half a dozen networks had claimed every available parking space, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like mechanical sunflowers. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled, with dozens more standing along the walls and in the aisles until the bailiff finally closed the doors and turned away the overflow. Samuel arrived early, dressed in the same olive military jacket he had worn to the auction a year ago. It seemed fitting somehow, a reminder of where this journey had begun and how far they had come. Beside him walked Judge Patricia Hawthorne, the retired federal judge who had volunteered to represent him. She was 72 years old, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen decades of legal battles. When she entered the courtroom, even the Harrington lawyers seemed to straighten in their seats. Preston and Wade Harrington sat at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by their team of expensive attorneys. Preston wore a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than Samuel's truck, and he maintained an expression of confident superiority despite the hostile murmurs that followed him wherever he went. He had underestimated the public response to this case, but he was not about to show weakness now. In his mind, the law was on his side, and that was all that mattered. Judge Raymond Foster, a stern man in his 60s who had presided over Clearwater County cases for nearly 2 decades, called the proceedings to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. The room fell silent instantly, every eye fixed on the bench where the fate of Spirit would be decided. This court will hear the matter of Harrington versus Thornton, regarding ownership of the equine animal commonly known as Spirit. He looked over his glasses at both tables. I have reviewed the filings from both parties. This is a complex case with significant public interest, but I expect all involved to conduct themselves with decorum. Is that understood? Both sides acknowledged the judge's instructions, and the hearing began. Gerald Finch, Preston's lead attorney, rose first to present his case. He spoke for nearly an hour, citing regulations and statutes, producing documents and expert testimony about BLM procedures. His argument was technically sound, built on the premise that a paperwork irregularity at the original roundup had invalidated all subsequent sales. If Spirit had never been legally cleared for auction, then Samuel's purchase was void, and the horse technically remained federal property that the Harringtons, as the largest ranch in the region, were generously offering to adopt. The argument was clever, designed to wrap a personal vendetta in the cloak of legal propriety. But Judge Hawthorne was ready. When her turn came, she rose slowly, letting the silence build before she spoke. She did not dispute the technical claims about BLM procedures. Instead, she attacked the foundation of the entire case. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom, "we are not here today because of paperwork irregularities. We are here because a wealthy man could not accept losing to someone he considered beneath him." "Objection," Finch shouted, rising from his seat. "Counsel is making inflammatory accusations without evidence." Judge Foster considered for a moment, then shook his head. "Overruled. I will allow this line of argument." Continued Judge Hawthorne. She continued with surgical precision. She produced records showing that Preston Harrington had made no inquiries about Spirit or any other horse from the disputed roundup until after losing the county fair competition. She presented evidence that dozens of other horses from the same roundup had been sold without challenge. Their owners never contacted or threatened with legal action. She called witnesses who testified to Preston's public statements about wanting to humiliate Samuel, his prediction that Spirit would be dead by Christmas, his mockery at the auction that had been captured on his own phone's video. And then she called Samuel to the stand. The old veteran walked to the witness box with quiet dignity, his bearing straight despite the pain in his hip. Under Judge Hawthorne's gentle questioning, he told his story. He spoke of finding Spirit at the auction, of the condition the horse had been in, of the weeks and months of patient care that had brought him back from the brink of death. He spoke of the bond they had formed, 2 broken souls finding healing in each other, and he spoke of what Spirit meant to him, not as property or as a competition animal, but as a friend. "I have spent my life serving others," Samuel said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I served my country in war, and I came home to find that country did not have much use for me anymore. I have worked hard, asked for nothing, and expected nothing. When I found Spirit, he was dying. Everyone said to let him go, that he was not worth saving. But I saw something in him, something that deserved a chance." He paused, looking out at the packed courtroom. "What I have learned is that worth is not about money or bloodlines or what other people think of you. Worth is about heart. Spirit has more heart than any creature I have ever known. Taking him from me will not change what he is. It will only prove what his accusers are. The courtroom was utterly silent when Samuel finished speaking. Even Preston Harrington seemed affected, though he quickly masked his expression with practiced indifference. Judge Foster called a recess to consider the evidence, and the crowd filed out into the autumn sunshine to wait. The recess lasted 2 hours. When the bailiff finally called everyone back inside, the tension was almost unbearable. Samuel sat at the defense table, his hands folded in front of him, his heart pounding against his ribs. Somewhere outside, Spirit waited in a borrowed trailer, unaware that his future hung in the balance of what happened in the next few minutes. Judge Foster took his seat and shuffled through some papers before looking up at the assembled crowd. "I have considered all testimony and evidence presented in this case," he announced, his voice betraying nothing. "It is the finding of this court that the plaintiff's claims, while technically grounded, are brought in bad faith and constitute an abuse of legal process." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Preston Harrington's face went pale. The judge continued, his voice growing stronger. "Furthermore, this court finds that Samuel Thornton acted in good faith throughout his acquisition and care of the animal in question. Ownership is hereby confirmed, and all claims against Mr. Thornton are dismissed with prejudice." He brought down his gavel with a resounding crack. "This case is closed." The eruption of cheers that followed the judge's ruling shook the walls of the old courthouse. Strangers embraced, tears flowed freely, and somewhere in the crowd, someone started chanting Samuel's name until the whole room joined in. The old veteran sat motionless for a long moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. Then Judge Hawthorne placed a hand on his shoulder, and he finally allowed himself to breathe, to believe, to accept that the nightmare was over. Preston Harrington stormed out of the courtroom without a word, his face twisted with a rage that seemed to age him 10 years in the span of minutes. His brother Wade followed, along with their team of lawyers who were already calculating how to spin this devastating loss. Outside, they were met by a wall of cameras and shouting reporters, questions hurled at them like stones. Preston shoved through the crowd without responding, his expensive suit becoming disheveled in his haste to escape. The image of his retreat would be broadcast on every news network that evening, a symbol of arrogance brought low by its own hubris. Samuel emerged from the courthouse to find Spirit waiting in the trailer, exactly where he had left him. The horse nickered at the sight of his companion, pressing his nose against the trailer bars in greeting. Samuel walked to him on legs that felt unsteady, reaching through the bars to stroke the soft muzzle he had come to love so deeply. "We did it, boy," he whispered, his voice breaking. "We did it. Nobody can take you away now. Nobody, ever again." The celebration that followed became legendary in Clearwater County history. The entire town seemed to turn out for a spontaneous party at the fairgrounds, the same place where Samuel and Spirit had claimed their unlikely victory just months before. There was music and food and laughter, and at the center of it all stood the old veteran and his horse, accepting congratulations and well wishes from hundreds of people who had become invested in their story. Dr. Chen found Samuel standing apart from the crowd as the evening wore on, watching Spirit graze peacefully in a small paddock that had been set up for him. She stood beside him in comfortable silence for a while before speaking. "You know what you have done is bigger than just saving one horse," she said quietly. "You have given people hope. You have shown them that the little guy can still win sometimes, that doing the right thing still matters." Samuel nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Spirit. "I did not set out to prove anything to anyone," he replied. "I just saw a creature that needed help and I could not walk away." Everything else followed from that one decision. In the weeks and months that followed, the ripples of that decision spread far beyond anything Samuel could have imagined. The national attention on the case prompted a congressional investigation into BLM wild horse management practices, leading to reforms that would benefit thousands of Mustangs for years to come. The donations that had poured in to support Samuel's legal defense, far exceeding what was needed, were used to establish a nonprofit organization dedicated to rescuing and rehabilitating wild horses. Samuel named it Spirit's Second Chance, and it became a model for similar programs across the country. The Harrington brothers never recovered from the public humiliation of the trial. Their reputation, carefully cultivated over decades, crumbled under the weight of their own cruelty. Business partners distanced themselves. Longtime customers took their patronage elsewhere. Within 2 years, the Double H Ranch was sold to pay mounting debts, its grand stables and manicured pastures passing into the hands of new owners who had no connection to the name Harrington. Preston moved to another state, seeking anonymity he would never fully find. Wade simply disappeared, and nobody in Clearwater County missed either of them. As for Samuel and Spirit, they lived out their days exactly as they had always intended, in quiet contentment on the small property at the end of the dirt road. The trophy from the county fair remained on Samuel's mantle, joined over the years by other awards and recognitions that came his way. But the honor he treasured most was not made of gold or crystal. It was the soft nicker that greeted him every morning, the warm breath against his palm, the simple presence of a companion who asked for nothing but gave everything. Samuel continued to ride Spirit through the mountain trails well into his 70s, though the rides grew shorter as both of them aged. They moved more slowly than they once had, but the joy they found in each other's company never diminished. On summer evenings, they would stand together at the pasture fence watching the sun set behind the peaks, two souls who had found each other when they needed it most. The years passed with the gentle rhythm of seasons changing, of snow falling and melting, of wild flowers blooming and fading. Samuel's hair turned fully white, and Spirit's muzzle grayed with age. But the bond between them remained as strong as it had been from that very first moment, when a trembling colt had touched his nose to a veteran's outstretched hand and chosen to trust again. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep on a spring morning, 23 years after that fateful day at the auction. He was 86 years old, and Spirit was 24. The horse seemed to know somehow, standing vigil at the pasture fence closest to the cabin, refusing to eat or drink until Samuel's family came to check on him. They found the old veteran in his bed, a photograph of Spirit clutched in his weathered hands, a peaceful smile on his face. Spirit lived for 3 more months after Samuel's passing, cared for by the same community that had rallied to save him all those years ago. When he finally lay down in the pasture one quiet evening and did not rise again, those who found him said he looked peaceful, as if he had simply decided it was time to rejoin his friend. They were buried together, man and horse, on the property they had shared. A simple stone marks the spot, inscribed with words that tell their story in the simplest possible terms. Here lie Samuel Thornton and Spirit. They saved each other. And in Clearwater County, when people pass by that small plot of land at the end of the dirt road, they still tell the story of the poor veteran and the diseased wild colt that nobody wanted. They tell of mockery silenced and arrogance humbled. They tell of a love that transcended species and circumstance. And in the telling, they remind themselves and each other that true worth has nothing to do with wealth or status, and everything to do with the courage to see value where others see none. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and leave a comment below. I would love to know where you are watching from and what this story meant to you. And if you have not already, please subscribe to join our community of storytellers. Until next time, remember that every creature deserves a chance, and sometimes the greatest champions come from the humblest beginnings.